Hello BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. These are the books I've been working on this week. To introduce them briefly, the Chinese classic, Three Kingdoms by Luo Guanzhong. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Continuing my journey through the Bible with the Book of Leviticus. The third book in Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy, The Mirror and the Light. A book for professional development, Teaching Speaking, a Holistic Approach by Christine M. Go and Ann Burns. And then in the comic book category, we have The Incredible Hulk, Crossroads from the Marvel Epic Collection. All right, so as I mentioned last week, I made the decision to expand my reading list by starting up the Bible again and starting up another book for professional development again and going on for another Chinese classic after finishing the last Chinese classic. And I mentioned last week that I wasn't quite sure that was a good idea given my limited reading time, and yeah, now I can say that I'm sure this probably wasn't a good idea given my limited reading time. So my goal had been to read maybe at least 4 pages of each of these books every day, which I didn't make. Although I did read some of each of them throughout the week, so I have made some progress. But yeah, even more than that, I think the trade-off with balancing multiple books is you don't really get to immerse yourself in any of them. And I think you lose something when you're just doing a book piecemeal. You're not really able to get the whole experience of what it's like to be immersed in it for long periods at a time. That being said, often when I'm just reading one book, sometimes my weekly page count can be pretty abysmal. The Mirror and the Light, I thought I would have liked to read more of it, immerse myself in more of it to get a feel for what Hilary Mantel is doing. But I just had limited time. The Romance of Three Kingdoms, there's a lot of names in here, and I think if I would immerse myself in it more, I would have more of a hand on who the characters are, well, etc. That's true for all these books. But that being said, let me just go through what I did get read this week, and I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet, largely just because consequence of having to split my brain over multiple books is it's difficult to recall everything at the end of the week. So I'll just do the best I can and give short, maybe summaries. So The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, when I mentioned this last week, I was only on page 35. I've read up now to page 108, so I've made a bit of a dent in it. 100 pages is a dent. Of course, this is volume 1 of 4, so it's about a 2,000 page book. So 100 pages is what 1/5 of it. But yeah, the first few chapters deal with trouble in the Han Dynasty. There's the emperor is being controlled by a gang of 10 eunuchs who are corrupting the court. There's all sorts of natural disasters, and there is rebellion in the empire with the revolt of the Yellow Turbans, sometimes translated as the Yellow Scarves. So they fight the Yellow Turbans, and the main characters for this novel are introduced in the Yellow Turban Uprising. So the author of this novel uses the Yellow Turbans as a background to introduce a lot of his main characters. Then once the Yellow Turban Uprising is over, we get back into the intrigues at court, where there's the gang of 10 eunuchs who are plotting various things. And there's different empresses who are plotting to have their own son succeed the king. So the king has like the king has multiple wives. There are two of them who want their sons to succeed him. The eunuchs back one, the king backs another. Then the king passes away. There's a faction that backs one prince, which gets some support from a local general. The eunuchs support another one. One prince gains the throne, but there's continual plotting. And then eventually, because of all the infighting, the generals are called in. And there's a guy whose name I'm not going to be able to pronounce. This is going to be an ongoing issue with reviewing this book, is not pronouncing the names. But there's a guy who gets called in, Dong Zhu, doing my best. He gets called in, but once he gets called in, he decides he wants to take over. He deposes and then eventually kills the reigning emperor and installs his brother as the emperor with the intention of reigning in his stead, using him as a puppet king. All the other lords revolt against this sacrilege against heaven, deposing the rightful emperor. And there's a battle going on now between all the lords on one hand and this Dong Zhu general on the other hand. Now, where this is going, and I know where this is going because the publishers don't make any attempt to hide it. Right from the publisher's introduction, you get a sense of who the leaders of the three kingdoms are going to be. But the leaders of the three kingdoms are so far still all on the same side, the future leaders of the three kingdoms. So it has not yet split into the three kingdoms. The people who will become the leaders of the various three kingdoms are all still on the same side against this corrupt general. I am just barely scratching the surface. There is a lot of stuff that goes on in here. It reads like a history, not like a modern history book, but like, it reads like, I know this is a Chinese book, but it reads like, if you've ever read the ancient historians, it reads a bit like Livy or Herodotus, where it's mostly a chronicle of events, but there is some dialogue, some speeches. You get access to what some of the characters think. To me, it reads like one of the ancient Roman or Greek historians. But in China, this is not considered a history. This is considered a novel based on the histories. So we have the histories, and then we have this retelling of the histories in the novel form. Now, I mentioned last week that I was looking to help me keep track of all the names in this novel and to kind of help me sort out everything. I was looking at some podcasts to listen to, and I've found one, the Discourse on the Three Kingdoms, which I've started listening to this week. I was hoping they would help me keep all the names straight. Although I'm not sure it's a great help with that, but it is very eye-opening to hear them talk about all the real history that this is based on. So they say the historical records show this, in the novel it's like this. The historical records show this, in the novel it's like this. Which makes me realize just how rich the historical records were. Now this takes place in China in about 220 AD. So it would have been in the time of the Roman Empire in the West. And it sounds like they just have a whole lot of records in the Chinese histories for a whole lot of stuff that was going on there, which seems to be maybe much richer than the historical records that were in the West at this time. I'm reminded, I might mention this story a few times when reviewing this novel, but I'm reminded of a Chinese friend I once had in Australia who was telling me once, he said, there's no way Christianity could be real because if there really was a Christ, God would have put him in China, because he said the Chinese are so good at keeping records of everything, such detailed histories. God wouldn't have put Christ in Israel, where that nobody was very good at keeping records of stuff. It would have been in China. It would have been so well documented. That little note of religious heresy aside, his larger point about just how meticulous the Chinese historians were, how much records we have of it, I'm starting to get a sense of that, or a greater appreciation of that. So between this and the podcast I'm listening to, it's an interesting historical journey about a period in history I knew nothing about. And I'm a little bit worried at some point I'm going to get lost, but for the moment I'm still hanging on. I've been trying to... There's a lot happening, and there are a lot of characters getting introduced, more characters getting introduced in each chapter. So part of me is thinking I should slow down and try and consolidate this. But another part of me is thinking if I start slowing down, I'm going to start losing track of who these characters are. So I need to just kind of keep pushing on, keep making progress in this novel. So I think that's what I'm going to try and do, is just keep making progress with it. So I'm just at the end of chapter 6, 108 pages into this. The Bible, reading Leviticus. Now, I've mentioned before that Leviticus is not my favorite book of the Bible, just because it's a little bit boring. But I don't know. Maybe I was complaining too much. It is boring, but it's readable. I was reading about the rules concerning the clean and unclean, which is a big thing in the Bible. It's interesting. They talk about like the unclean animals, and it calls them detestable. Like among the birds, here are those you must hold detestable, or the water creatures. You hold them detestable if they have no fins or scales, or all the winged insects that move on 4 feet you must hold detestable. I wonder what the original Hebrew word would be, but the Jerusalem Bible translates it as all these animals are detestable. And I think, well, that's a little strange. I mean, God, you're the one who made them. If they're so detestable, why did you make them? But maybe that's a bit of a mistranslation. Maybe detestable just means not good for eating, or I don't know. But detestable is the word they use. There's a lot of repetition in Leviticus, which is one of the main reasons it's so boring. So in the parts I read last week, they were talking about all the different sacrifices. And it kept going through the different rituals for the different types of sacrifices, and a lot of it was the same. It was just small variations. Now we're going on the rules for the different types of leprosy. So there's the swelling and scabs, the chronic leprosy, the boils, the burns, the disease of the scalp and the chin, all these, the rash, the loss of hair, the leprosy of clothes, the purification of lepers, just so much rules for the lepers. But it's a lot of the same stuff. Like they present themselves to the priest. The priest has to examine the skin. If the scab is not spreading, then the priest declares them to isolate for 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, they're declared clean. And it just kind of repeats that same formula for all the different types of leprosy, making it very repetitive, but I don't know, readable. Leprosy is also kind of a weird one. I mean, I remember I grew up in the church in Sunday school. We were always hearing the stories in the Bible about leprosy, and what a terrible disease it was. And of course, we always asked, where are the people with leprosy now? Or like, how come we never hear about it now? And I never got a good answer for that in Sunday school. Every now and again, I look up leprosy on Wikipedia, and I think if I remember right, am I remembering this right? Nobody really knows what the leprosy that was in the Bible. There's some sort of like Hansen's disease that we think might have been somewhat equivalent to the leprosy they're talking about in the Bible, but nobody really knows it. I mean, it's just odd because it's such a big deal in the Bible, the Old and New Testament. And then you just never hear about leprosy anywhere outside of the Bible, right? You know? You never hear about leprosy in the Middle Ages, do you? Or oh, no, you do, right? There was that one. Sorry, I'm thinking aloud as I film. But there was that one king of Jerusalem who had leprosy, right? Okay. I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm talking about. So moving on. Then we get the sexual impurities of men and of women in Leviticus 15. It's not quite as juicy as it sounds, not quite as salacious as it sounds. It's just basically how long you're unclean for after doing something. A point which has been made by other people, but which you can't help but notice, is the women don't get a lot of breaks with the cleanliness rules. They're unclean after childbirth, they're unclean during their period, they're unclean for 7 days after their period. Anything they touch when they're on their period becomes unclean. It's difficult to keep these cleanliness rules if you're a woman, or more difficult. Okay. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I somewhat regret that the fact that I'm dividing my attention among several books means I'm not able to devote as much attention to this as I would like. I read about 50 pages about this from where are my page counts? 216 to 268. The main thing that happened in the pages that I read, I mean, there's a few things. There's a lot of different talking. Tyndale is apparently... Tyndale, the guy who translated the Bible into English, is apparently caught now in Antwerp. Tyndale has been like a lurking figure behind all three volumes. Cromwell has some sort of tenuous connection to Tyndale through his agents in Europe, and is sympathetic to Tyndale's mission to translate the Bible into English, which was, believe it or not, an offense that you got burned for at the time. So Tyndale has now been caught, and actually I think he got caught in book 2, but now it's rumored that he's dead. So the Tyndale drama is still continuing in this third book. Cromwell meets the daughter of Cardinal Wolsey, who is in a nunnery, and she believes that Cromwell betrayed her father, which absolutely devastates him. Because the major theme throughout these three books is how Cromwell has stayed loyal to Wolsey, even after Wolsey's death. And then there's the uprising against King Henry, the Catholic uprising in the north of England, which is something I vaguely remember both from my forays into British history, listening to the British Isles, and from watching the Tudor TV show. But yeah, that's playing out in the novel now. Then, teaching speaking. I finished up chapter 1, which I think was just largely talking about the various issues with teaching speaking in the classroom, like teaching an effective factors or motivation to speak. Chapter 2, cognitive processes in speaking, is fairly interesting, talking about all the different things that are going on when your brain is speaking, although my understanding from having read a lot of these books about language learning and second language acquisition and stuff like that is a lot of this is guesswork about what actually is happening in the brain. The cognitive science, our knowledge of the brain just isn't there yet to say with any degree of certainty. But they've got this little chart about all the things that are going on the brain: the long-term memory, conceptual preparation, formulation, articulation, self-monitoring, knowledge about the language, grammar, vocabulary. That's all being juggled somehow in the brain whenever we speak. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm speaking right now. My mouth is moving, my lungs are pushing out air, and I am forming words. But when you stop and think about all the things that your brain has to do in order to get those words out at the rate of speech that I'm currently talking, right? When we talk so fast, and our brain must be juggling so many things to get out those utterances in the form of grammatically correct speech. So interesting things to think about. Not that this is the first book to make that observation, but interesting. And then the Incredible Hulk. So the Incredible Hulk Crossroads. He's still exiled at the Crossroads here, which is the storyline for this book. He has a friend at the Crossroads called the Puffball Collective, which is a collective of different puffballs, which has been trying to befriend Hulk throughout most of this volume. And again, the thing to keep in mind with this volume is these were issues that appeared once a month on the newsstands back in the day. So this is a storyline which, at the time it came out, had been stretched out for like over a year at this point, I think. But we get the conclusion to that, which is the Puffball Collective is actually an evil entity which tricks Hulk and lures him. But then Hulk is now suddenly assisted by three beings which appear out of nowhere, which are a little, what do you call that? Like a guardian angel with pointed ears and a crossbow, a goblin, and a star, who are now Hulk's perpetual sidekicks or guardian angels. Now, I got a little bit curious about how, what's their place in the larger Marvel mythology. So I Googled them, which has provided me with some spoilers. I guess what's going to be revealed later on in this book is that they are parts of Hulk's subconscious. So they're just projections of his mind. But it looks like they're going to be real or figments of Hulk's imagination. It looks like they're going to be major characters for the second half of this book. Just flipping through it, they appear all over. So they are accompanying Hulk now on his journeys. And that's all. So I'm sorry, I didn't keep my promise to be brief, did I? I never do. I always say I'm going to be brief, and I never am. But that's my reading for this week. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week, BookTube.